sites on the ring road, subject to policy tests, safety and design quality. Minden Place has been mentioned, sir, in the debate, and has served the island well, but is not as good as it could be, sir, and so we need to look for alternatives. So I want to address one anticipated criticism that supporting this proposition is somehow inconsistent with sustainable transport. It isn't. We can do both. We must and we will keep investing in safer walking and cycling routes, better bus stops. We've added 3, sir, to the St Helier Hopper bus in the last 2 months, and active travel connections. And we will expect developers to provide a reasonable level of on-site residential parking so that neighbouring streets, parishes and public car parks are not asked to pick up the bill. So it doesn't have to be underground, sir. There are lots of examples of ground floor parking in St Helier that others could follow. This is the balanced, pragmatic approach islanders expect. It supports families, it protects the public purse, and it keeps us moving forward on sustainable transport by design, not by creating parking shortfalls that frustrate residents and push the problem elsewhere. So that is why I'm supporting this proposition. Let's give islanders choice, ease pressure on the public parking estate, and set a practical, site-sensitive baseline for new homes, while we continue to deliver the safer crossings, better pavement and cycle facilities that make sustainable journeys more attractive every year. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tom. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I'm at a crossroads with this application, and I will touch on the relevant guidance, some experience. What did I? I must get my head out of the planning process a little more than I do. But I will touch on some of the. I've done it again in my speech there. Anyway, members, I do want to say that I am not happy with the current parking standards, and I believe that they are leading to the delivery of an increasingly large number of homes that do not adequately meet parking requirements across the whole island, and I will touch on the different areas. I should add, I live in Sustainable Transport Zone 1. I own my home which has no parking in it, and there is no world in which it could be provided. I would also like to add that all planning committee members and the ministers put aside our opinions on whether policy or guidance should exist and instead follow what is extant and approved, which leads to a reality that we both approve and refuse development that personally we may feel the opposite opinions to. This allows us to debate policy and then apply it despite our own positions. But so this proposition has, in my view, arisen, like many others on planning guidance, due to this kind of general growing frustration with a policy and a feeling that something needs to be done. The challenge, however, is today deciding whether this is the best way to fix it. The Minister has proposed in his speech that the policy gets the right balance at the moment, and I would urge him to reconsider this. He rightly highlighted that the wording of Part A of this proposition does not help him or his policy officers draft precise guidance that ensures confidence to the industry, but to suggest that no change is needed, in my view, will fail to recognise what is clearly a mood of members and the public, that the balance hasn't been struck at quite the right level. There is a balance to be had, and if we know that the Minister recognises this and is keen to address the problem, may allow a different, more evidence-led approach of finding that balance. So to give some examples, we should turn to the active guidance, not just for parking, but for density, and what also is missing when it helps to design and help people create proposals to come forward for approval or decision. I want to also make it clear that this proposal by the Conotab isn't just about St Helier. We have heard that others are well met or maybe not well enough with the current standards, but this is largely about St Helier. And the Minister himself said this dealt largely with town, but he also mentioned that there are 6 sustainable transport zones across the island. And I think that whilst the focus has been on St Helier, we should note that 5 out of the 6 sustainable transport zones allow for a minimum parking provision of less than 1 parking space per dwelling based on the rooms. Some examples of this include Sustainable Transport Zone 4, which I'm sure we're all well aware of the boundaries of that. For those who aren't, it runs all the way pretty much from town up to Gorey in the built-up area, and likewise heading westward. In Sustainable Transport Zone 4, the minimum level of provision for a one-bed home is 0.5 cars, which realistically means for every 2 one-bed homes, 1 parking space should be provided. In a 2-bed home, it's 0.75 cars, and then for 3-bed homes, 1 car, 4-bed homes, 2 cars. This does lead to a position where when developers are looking at sites and working with those who own the land to assess the value, they might be thinking about some units which won't have car parking space. And in these areas, there is a genuine debate to be had, is that the right provision? I just want to touch that members would be, if they approve this, addressing 5 sustainable transport zones, which all have a minimum provision of less than 1, and they should all be well aware of the guidance that they would be influencing when they make a decision today. So, it's also worth recognising that the thrust of the Bridging Island Plan adopted in 2022 was able to operate under the very old 1988 parking standards for 12 months and was compliant under those. And so guidance can be changed, and I think we should be happy to say a balance can be struck that meets the Bridging Island Plan but isn't currently where we are today. So turning to town, as I mentioned, I think there is a genuine link between parking provision, density and housing mix, and they all relate to each other. It should be obvious and clear to members that not every site in town can provide 1 parking space per unit. Indeed, some can't provide any. And it's also fair to say we've seen developments come forward with insufficient parking to what they could have provided on that site, and that's disappointing. One argument made by the Minister has been density. However, turning to the approved density standards, developments in town must meet a minimum of 50 dwellings per hectare. The draft guidance, which wasn't adopted, proposed a higher density for flats, but this is not what was approved. I may have shared with members before example densities, but 50 dwellings per hectare is Lanctree Gardens. Les Clos Couriard on Rouge Bouillon is 150 dwellings per hectare. So clearly there is a balance that can be struck that might be lower density, fully compliant with adopted density standards that would allow for greater parking. But the other concern is that not all dwellings in St Helier need parking. The Minister says not everybody needs a car in their life. Well, part of this, I think, comes from the concentration of 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units we are seeing built. Perhaps for those who come to Jersey for a short time, they don't want a car, but the over-concentration on housing stock of this type is perhaps preventing those creating families. But this proposition doesn't solve this. The Minister needs to be clear with a housing mix guidance so that we are building homes for the right people in the future, yet this has not been forthcoming. And the reason housing mix plays into this is because 5.5.1, the guidance on car-free development, states that normally, and the Minister has said, there's a requirement to prove car-free development, that it is well located with good access to services, it will provide fewer than 10 homes, and the predominant type of accommodation is less likely to accommodate families. So when we are building houses that are predominantly 1 and 2 bed, this policy is engaged more. But if we change the policies around the housing mix, the expectation of a greater amount of parking provision also changes. So there is no guidance for members to make decisions on the long-term needs of housing at the moment, only old and out-of-date assessments of housing need. So we have a lot to debate here, but this debate is not about all those topics. In some ways, we're debating on the fringes of what it means to live and belong in Jersey, and we've heard many arguments about this, but that has to be within the remit of all policies developed in the round. It is interesting to note that the existing guidance went through consultation, and what is telling are the responses to question 12. Question 12 asked quite simply whether you agree or disagree with the proposed standards of provision for residents' car parking space. 12% strongly agreed, 24% agreed, 20% neither agreed nor disagreed, 20% somewhat disagreed, and 24% strongly disagreed. Again, I think it is important for all members to recognise that we do need to address this. But turning back to the proposition, and as I highlighted, the wording is problematic. Members have, I think, taken some relief in where practicable. But what does that mean? Because the guidance will have to be clear as to the balance being struck about what is practicable. So, does this mean that we should be allowing substandard visibility splays? Should we be compromising because we know that any redevelopment of a site may not be able to achieve these? Should we be making a statement that therefore actually density has to have a limit to allow for a suitable ratio of housing? And a really interesting one is, what is the impact on parking at the expense of active shop fronts? The Conotard mentioned a recent approved development on 70 to 72 La Colomberie. The only perhaps way to provide a greater ratio of parking on that site would be to change the housing mix and have fewer apartments, go down, which some of us might be quite in favour of, or lose some of the active or semi-active frontage on La Colomberie, which had one retail unit and a large stretch of office space. If that was turned to parking, there would be a compromise to the vibrancy of the feeling of a main artery into town. That is the level of detail we need to think about when we talk about the balance of planning policy. And my challenge is the Conotard, whilst using this word to make it in some ways easier for members to support, makes it harder for the minister to find a balance in policy. Where does that leave us? We have an issue to solve. We are at risk of voting on the wrong wording. We could reject this. We could say we agree with the thrust of the Conotard. We could move to the next item, or, as members may or may not like, we could ask the Conotard for a reference back. The Conotard has used the wording. He must understand his thrust of what he expects that to deliver. As Conotard, he will have in his mind, and with his Roads Committee, a balance as to what St Helier should give up in return for greater parking. And whilst I know it's not always good to do a reference back to a backbencher, I believe that Conotard is well suited with resource and experience in this area to provide more detail. I want us to make an informed decision. I want the Minister to recognise there is clearly a growing issue and a frustration, but I want this Assembly to make a reasoned decision about how to set planning policy and ensure that we are doing so in a holistic way. So I will listen to the next couple of speeches, but I may then, depending on what those words are said, request a reference back on this. Thank you, sir.
Can I raise a point of order on just that process? Is the member allowed to intervene later on a reference back, or because he's just spoken, I think? So he can do so during the concurrence of his speech.
Yes, let me just consider that.
In other words, he can invite another member to do it later, but he can't. Sorry, sir.
No, I can do it any time.
Yes, thank you for raising that, Deputy Ayres. If we take the view that someone who has spoken can nonetheless propose a reference back during the course of the debate. Yes, Deputy Feltham.
Thank you, sir. I feel somewhat more comfortable with the wording than the previous speaker. I'm conscious when listening to this debate that people are talking about people living in St Helier, and the word others or them is used quite a lot. So as a St Helier resident, and representative of St Helier Central, I'm going to talk about we and us. It's interesting following the previous speaker who spoke about the different types of housing and housing density, because my experience in St Helier is actually there's very many family homes that families don't want to necessarily move into because of the practicality of living without parking. And I think, to be honest, the constable here has taken a very measured approach. He knows of a problem. He lives in St Helier as well and represents the parish where we have parking issues, and is seeking not to exacerbate it. And I think us as an assembly, we do have a role to seek not to exacerbate problems that we know already exist. So I did want to speak on behalf of residents and talk about my own experience and what the practicality of living without parking actually means. So, as St Helier residents, as it's been said by many speakers before, we're actually the ones that tend to walk to school and work and use our cars for very specific reasons. And one of those will be on a Saturday. So I challenge any member who thinks that living without a car is a practical thing to do for a family to park around the corner, maybe several streets away, and get your shopping back home. That is the reality for residents in our urban areas. You either stop on the street and do a quick dash in, hope that nobody pulls up behind you and starts beeping their horn, or you find the nearest parking space that you can get, which may or may not be a residence parking zone one, and if you don't have a residence parking permit, you may be hoping that the traffic warden doesn't come and find your car and give you a fine while you carry your bags. The other practical note is entertaining elderly family members. If you're lucky, you might have a disabled space on your street or nearby. You may well have to go and collect those members from where they live in town. I can use an example. I'm sure my mother-in-law won't mind me referring to her. When we pick her up from her over 55s development, which is in central St Helier, we have to stop on a yellow line while she does have mobility issues, makes it into the car. Again, there may well be people hooting and beeping at us because we haven't been able to find a car parking space as she finds it, as she makes her way to the car with her walking sticks. And then for families who are parking, and I am one of those that is currently and have been on the residence parking zone waiting list for, I think it's 2.5 years now. I've been told I probably need to wait another 6 months at least. You take your children out to evening things after school. So, for example, my daughter does girl guiding. We drive her up to where that is. It's not always in walking distance. And we kind of have to cross our fingers when we bring her back that there's still a parking space in the nearest car park to us. So that's a reality for families in town. If we go and visit family on a Sunday, go out for a Sunday lunch, we keep our eye on the clock because we know if we're later than about 4 o'clock, we're not going to get a parking space. We're going to have to drive around and walk down around town. Which reminds me again of the same, I was with Constable Jean on Monday at Brighter Futures when we were told of a family, the family, I think it was 4 or 5 children or 4 children with another one on the way, and having to rent a private parking space a good walking distance away. And that reminded me of the real cost of living pressure on families that are living without parking that is linked to their home. They are either having to pay for public parking or pay for private parking, and that is a real cost pressure on those people. So I am going to support the Constable's proposition. My concern is it probably doesn't go far enough to exacerbate the issues to cease exacerbating the issues that we already know exist. But it does give the Minister a clear indication that we value people living in urban areas. We understand the practicality of living in those areas, and we think that people living in urban areas should be treated equally with people living in the country parishes. And I do urge other members to support this proposition as well, because I do think it is our role not to continue to exacerbate issues that already exist and to seek to make life better for our community.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Alex Curtis.
So, as you may have guessed, I know others are meaning to speak, but I would like to operate Standing Order 83, Part 1B. A member of the States may propose without notice during the debate on a proposition that the proposition be referred back in order that Part B, any ambiguity or inconsistency in information relating to the proposition which has been provided be clarified, and the information I require for a reference back, and I hope members agree, is the ambiguity in where practicable means to that, as I think it is too ambiguous for officers to apply that in guidance that will give the required effect.
The difficulty with your suggestion, Deputy, is it isn't really consistent with the purpose of a reference back under Standing Order 83.2. Because Standing Order 83, as you know, and I'll read out to members who haven't got it in front of them, a member of the States may propose without notice during the debate on a proposition, the proposition be referred back in order that A, further information relating to the proposition can be provided to the state, so that's more information, or any ambiguity or inconsistency in information relating to the proposition, which has already been provided to the states, be clarified. What you're really concerned about is difficulty in interpreting the terms of the proposition. You're not really asking for further information in respect to the proposition. Do you follow?
Respectfully, sir, I don't follow.
Well, if you insist on your reference back, I'm not going to stop you having a reference back. But to my mind, your concern is about the interpretation of the proposition if adopted. And that's really a matter for the Minister to deal with if it's adopted in terms of any guidance he issues. But if you want to debate on reference back, I'm not entitled under Standing Order 83, I don't think, to refuse it. But it seems to me that the purpose of your reference back is not actually entirely consistent with standing orders. Other people want to talk about this briefly.
Just in relation to your point?
Yes, you can, Deputy Renouf, yes.
So is it possible that both you and Deputy Curtis are right in a sense, in that it is both asking the Minister, that the reference back would both ask the Minister to, were the reference back adopted, would ask the Minister to, if the proposition was passed, the Minister would be asked to do something, but it is also the case that a reference back would ask the proposer to provide more detail on what he means by the where possible line in his proposition.
Well, it's simply an ordinary English word. It's a question for determination of members what they think of where practical means. It's a word we can look up in the dictionary. But that's my view. And I'm not stopping a debate on reference back if that's what the member really wants. That's just my concern. Yes, Deputy Sadio.
So no, I think that's the debating point, isn't it? I think it is. We do set a very dangerous precedent if we can refer back on grounds of differences in interpretation of just ordinary English words rather than a reference back normally seeks additional information where there are
Yes.
policy ambiguities that we might have difficulty in knowing what the intention is of this. And I think this is, I think this isn't one of those areas. I think it will be up to planners and applicants when they make an application saying, look, we don't think it's practicable for us to have a car parking space here because it's so, it would be so difficult and it'd be so costly and there's such little space to do it that it's just not practicable for us to do that. And it would be what a reasonable person thinks, which is ultimately what the planner and the planning department or committee are there to do. And I think we just get into semantics if we're going to refer things back on the basis that, oh, I'm not quite sure that we know what that word means. It's got an ordinary English definition that we can look up in the dictionary and we can just substitute that. And I think we get very much into the Lewis Carroll world of rabbit holes if we go down that route. So there isn't any substantive more information that the proposer of this, who, let's point out that whilst there's nothing in the Standing Order 83 that says that you can't refer back to a private member's bill, effectively what this is, that's certainly not been the convention for the most part. In my memory of 15 or 17 years in this assembly, we don't tend to refer things back to private members if they're in order, and they're in order, and it tends to be the case that when ministers are proposing things which perhaps lack detail in their application, then if the majority of members want to refer them back for that detail and ambiguity, that's fine. But I don't think this is a suitable use of 83, and members might simply wish to vote against it if they think it's a badly worded proposition.
Yes, Deputy Scott, any observations?
So I just would point out that the context of this is in relation to a minimum standard, so I don't really I don't think what's being asked makes sense. We're talking about minimum standard, and that's of a minimum of one parking space.
So may I raise an additional point just whilst...
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I apologise for taking up the Assembly's time, but I wondered in advancing the requirements of a reference back, I would have suggested that the reference back could be including by remarks made by members such as myself that would ask not only just the limit of what the proposer has said, but for example that the matter be consulted by the constable with the planning department and developers, and is one able to, my question is one able to add an additional requirement in a reference back? I'll leave it at that.
So what you've suggested, Deputy Curtis, is that the reference back is for the purpose of determining what effect the proposition will have if paragraph A is adopted. Effectively, isn't it?
No, it's more that there is ambiguity or inconsistency within the information of the report to explain the interpretation in the constable's view. It is not to direct. It is not for the connoisseur to provide the direction as to how that will be interpreted, but members are voting with no advice or as from the connoisseur as to what he means, and there I take that as ambiguity in the report and in line with 83 1B.
So can I ask for a point of order? We don't vote on the report, sir. So the report is irrelevant, and if the report could not exist at all, we vote simply on what's being proposed.
Yes, but the information in the report is relevant to the proposition. So you say the ambiguity arises from the constable's report as to what practicable means.
Yes, his understanding as to what that should mean. Of course, it wouldn't be his power to dictate it.
Well, with some reservations, I'm permitting the debate on a reference back under Standing Order 83 on the footing that it is said by the proposer that there's an ambiguity in the report and the connoisseur's proposition generally as to what the meaning and effect of practicable means, and there should be a reference back for the purpose of further information on that issue. I'm not having many more debate on whether or not the debate starts.
I was
because we're
going to ask a
start
question
it.
of the SG, if I may.
No, not on this matter. You're left with my view. That's how standing orders work.
Sir,
There it is.
the
Do you want to speak in the debate?
proposition requires seconding, I think, sir.
Yes, it does. You're absolutely right. Well, I was going to come to that. Is the proposition? Do you want to say anything in support of the proposition?
I would, sir. Members may feel it isn't appropriate for a reference back on this and they can vote it accordingly. However, I think there is a huge amount of ambiguity and confusion within the report as to what is being directed in Part A of the proposition. To touch, although I'm sure he will speak on it and I will speak in closing, for example, I don't take that the wording where practicable requires that to be the exact implementation of the minister. He will have to come up with guidance, and there is no steer at the moment as to what that guidance would be, because the report, which does guide the proposition, has no influence of balance. So I will listen to members on the reference back, and I will of course sum up and make the reference back.
Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does anyone wish to speak on the proposition? Conor Tarverson Hellier.
Thank you, sir. References back, in my experience of states debates, tend to happen fairly near the beginning of the debate, and they're quite often synonymous with wrecking motions. It's a shame that this one has happened several hours into the debate, and it's certainly, without suggesting any criticism of the chair, it's certainly one of the oddest reference backs I can remember. The word practicable has a meaning in English, and as the report has been invoked, I direct members to the 4th paragraph of the report, where I sought to explain it as far as I thought it needed explaining. And I quote, "The parish of St Helier's Highway Authority, the Roads Committee, in its capacity as a statutory consultee on planning applications, has consistently requested the planning department to ensure that adequate parking is provided in new developments or rebuilds. The committee has accepted that this is not always possible, or one might say practicable, especially in the conversion of buildings or where there are concerns about built heritage. However, much of the new housing which our parish has had to accept are large, flatted developments with ample opportunity for car parking, albeit that underground parking provision affects the profit to be made from such developments." End quote. And so, sir, to summarise, practicable means where it is possible to achieve more parking without damaging the built heritage, the shop fronts that were mentioned by the Deputy in his first speech, without other, he mentioned, I think, turning areas and obviously road safety considerations. It's impracticable, it's impossible to support a car park which is going to endanger life. And that's why I put the words in. But if it simply affects the bottom line of a developer, the ability to make money, then that is something that the planners ought to not take into account. They should say to the developer, go away, sharpen your pencils, and provide these town residents with a little bit more parking, as Dandara did in West Centre. I urge members to reject the proposition, sir.
Thank you. I'm going to, 3 members have asked to speak. I'm then going to close the debate and move to the vote. Deputy Morell, Renouf and Balash. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to follow the Constable because his explanation of where practicable strikes directly at the heart of why I think Deputy Curtis's reference back is an entirely valid point. And that is, whilst the Constable referred to affecting the profits of developers, which is a wonderful way to characterise developers, what he does not refer to, and what I think is absolutely vital to understand, is does where practicable include financial viability of the project, full stop, because that is linked to profits, but it's most importantly linked to whether the actual building of a development goes ahead or not. And until we have clarity on whether the financial viability of a project is actually to be seen as practicability or not, then I think we are very dangerously treading into territory as an assembly where we are basically going to make housing more expensive in Jersey because we will ensure that less housing is built in Jersey. And that is something that this proposition is going to do. It will force the price of housing up, and it will make sure
You need
that
to
less
focus
housing is
only
built.
on the merits of the reference
That's
back.
correct. And so therefore understanding whether practicability includes financial viability or not, I think is absolutely vital. And as it stands, neither the report nor the proposition give us clarity on whether practicability includes financial viability or not. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Renner, if you wanted to speak on this.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I'm pleased to follow Deputy Morell, who I think has amplified a concern that I have. And I think, if anything, the Constable of St Helier's speech amplified also the reason why a reference back would make a lot of sense here, which is that already in saying in making his quote from his proposition from the report, he began to elide practicable with possible. And those are two very different things. And the word practicable is doing all the heavy lifting in this proposition. All the heavy lifting is done by that which has been quoted repeatedly by members as the get-out clause, if you like. And the Constable raises the question as to why it wasn't made earlier, this proposition. Well, I think it has become clear through the debate that that heavy lifting is being done. Everybody is using that as the kind of, everybody who's supporting the proposition is making reference to that. Where practicable is the nub of this proposition in a way. And I think it would be interesting just to focus on how that might be interpreted. One of the things I was going to make in my points I was going to make in my speech is if you look at a particular example of how that might play out, the JDC development on the waterfront. If this proposition is adopted, then where practicable will come into effect, but so will the planning guidance, the new planning guidance, which is that every single dwelling in that development, however it is proposed, must have a parking space. Where practicable? Well, it's practicable to dig out, potentially, it's practicable to dig out more of the contaminated ground there at a cost of £90,000 per car parking place. It might be practicable, or is it practicable? Is practicable in this sense feasible? It's possible, which is the synonym the Constable reached for when he described what he meant by practicable. It's certainly possible to dig out all that ground and find somewhere to put it and so on. But is it feasible? Is feasible what we're looking for as a synonym here? And I think it would be quite useful to clarify this for members. I think the issue here is, are we about making good policy? Are we about making good policy? Would this policy be improved by having greater clarity around what is meant? Surely this assembly is about good policy. It would surely be better to make sure that if there is going to be some change to policy around this, that we are clear what that new policy is, what it will mean in practice. And I think the debate, as the debate has gone on, I think it has become clear to me, certainly, that there is incredible ambiguity around that. And I think it would be very useful to have that, press the pause button on that, ask the Constable to clarify what he means, possibly by way of an addendum to the report, or possibly just by a speech when he comes to bring it back. And I think it would be, therefore, I think this is actually a potentially a good move in terms of the Assembly thinking on its feet to make sure that the decisions it makes are ones that will make sense in the future.
So may I raise a point of order? It's about the wording of the proposition. So is my reading correct that even if we do adopt this today with the current wording, it will be for the Minister for Environment to, he has to come back and amend supplementary planning guidance, which he will do as he sees fit in accordance with what's been voted on here. So he will come back with his own
If the proposition is adopted, it's a matter for the Minister to consider what the Assembly has adopted and make adjustments to the guidance accordingly in the usual way. Yeah. Yes, Deputy Balash.
So I can't help feeling that the two previous speakers have followed the invitation of Deputy Tadier and have gone down the rabbit hole. It seems to me that there is absolutely no ambiguity about this whatsoever. It's necessary to look at the whole of paragraph A and not simply to extract one word from it. What the paragraph A says is that the supplementary planning guidance should be revised to ensure that a minimum of 1 parking space is provided per unit of accommodation. Nothing could be more straightforward than that. But the constable has qualified it, and he's qualified it by the words where practicable. And practicable is an ordinary English word. I looked at a dictionary definition on my phone, and it says able to be done or put into practice successfully. That's what it means. And that will be a question for the planning officials to determine. And one can only express the hope that planning officials will use their common sense. They will act in accordance with whatever the circumstances of the particular application require. I oppose this reference back.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I always have problems with reference back very late on, I have to say, but I understand why the deputy's bringing it. I did ask the SG, I think I'm allowed to share that information from our conversation. You can always correct me, sir, if I interpret it wrong. Practicable has no legal standing whatsoever. It is a word, as was suggested earlier, that just
Well,
means...
I said to you it was an ordinary English word. And,
Yeah, so, so therefore there's no legal precedent set. I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, so I would be better off if I was. Probably, so, I'd imagine.
The legal profession may not be, though.
It's always good to get support from your colleagues, sir. And now I've lost track of what I was saying. But I think, regards this reference back, I think we're at a point where we just need to vote on this. And if you don't agree with it, don't vote for it. If you do agree with it, vote for it, because I think we know that practicable means, and it does need to come back from the Minister. I will also say that I'm a St Helier resident too, and I think we do have to think about St Helier. It is a really challenging place when you don't have, even if you do have space outside your house, getting permission to actually knock down a small wall.
do you remember we're confined to the reference back?
Yes, sir. But my point being, the word practicable for St Helier is very clear, I think. It's what you can actually do when you do it. It may be different in the countryside because you may have a lot more space, but it's clear what's practicable and what isn't when you're trying to build in St Helier. I think it is I didn't speak on the main proposition because I didn't get a chance to, but perhaps do we get to speak on that still, sir?
If this is rejected, then we'll return to the
I'll wait
debate.
to that if this isn't referenced back, because there are some points I think to be made on that.
Thank you, Deputy Ward. Deputy Miller, do you want to speak?
Thank you, sir. I don't think we should support the reference back at this point. We've talked about this for now almost 2 hours, and to then what will be seen in the eyes of the public is kicking it into long grass over a question of interpretation is entirely wrong. I do have issues over what practicability will mean, but I will come back to that if we return to the debate. Thank you, sir.
Yes. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I think that the proposer has raised a valid point for planning policy officers to consider, but I don't believe that it's the Constable St Helier's role to develop the policy. I believe that's the planning policy officers under the direction of the Minister for the Environment. And in that respect, I am going to draw a parallel because the actual point that has been raised has been one about whether the extent to which commercial viability needs to be taken into account when considering matters such as practicability. And it's a point that I myself have raised with the Minister, seeking further supplementary planning guidance in the case of policies ER1 and ER4, which I'm sure, as the proposer knows, relates to the use of retail outlets and the extent to which their use can be changed if there's shown to be no market demand. And in my own constituency, we were seeing a long-running saga here where a developer is proposing that a site in the coastal national park area in St One's Bay should be converted. Planning policy office, planning inspector comes over appeal, supports this, and the minister is rejecting it because he actually believes that the actual premises should be offered at a commercially viable price or market rent. So it is indeed valid, and it is something that should be taken on board by planning policy officers, but I really do think that the Constable St Helier should be spared that task and won't be supporting reference back. Bye.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister, do you want to say?
Very briefly, sir. So I highlighted in my speech that when I saw the words, well, where practicable, my alarm bell started ringing. And I think the fact that we've actually spent some time now focusing on those two words with not a complete agreement on what they mean or how we interpret them shows the challenge that my policy officers and my planning officers would face. So I'll leave it there. But what I would say, sir, is I will support this. I think it possibly would give my department and myself an opportunity to work with the Constable, should he be agreeable, to potentially refine this proposition and come back with something which would be more acceptable. I take the mood of the Assembly. I think we all do that. But I think we can do better, and here's an opportunity. Thank you, sir.
I call upon the proposer to reply. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I will thank firstly Deputy Morell and Renif for highlighting the fundamental challenge, highlighting in the Connotab's remarks on this reference back that there is already inconsistency with what he has just said and what is in the proposition. Turning to two specific examples of inconsistency, Deputy Renif mentioned the waterfront, and members will know that the previously refused plans had circa 1,000 units and 525 parking spaces, not all of which I think were for the occupants. Where practicable may mean that only 525 units can be delivered on that site. I pass no judgment on the merits of lowering the density of the waterfront development, or it may mean digging lower or putting the car parking higher. But that fundamental tension between the density of development and the ability to provide parking, and as highlighted, the cost and the financial feasibility, it is essential. Deputy Morell highlighting the financial viability. On a complete blank site, one would say maybe it's very hard to argue with the words where practicable. You could do anything, you must be able to hit that. But there will be policy constraints, and I think there is still a large amount of ambiguity in this. I think the Minister has offered a good way forward by using this time to firm up what this means. And I will leave members with the fact that I believe that they will be sorely disappointed with the outcome if this wording is adopted, and to take Deputy Scott's point, that officers will draft guidance on this. Because officers, when they use where practicable, will put on their hats, understanding the policy context, and they will, in my expectation, balance economic viability, balance active shop fronts, and they will create something that may not deliver at all what members in this Assembly are trying to vote on. And that to me sounds inconsistent, it sounds ambiguous, and it will lead to sore disappointment for some, maybe many, in different quarters. That is not, as Deputy Renif says, how we make policy, and I urge us to find a productive and constructive way to refine and commit to changing this policy in a slightly more nuanced way. I think the reference back will help, and I call for the appel.
Appel has been called. 4 members are invited to return to their seats. Tadia, you need to return to your seat as well for voting.
Give me a moment, sir.
All right. So members are voting on the proposition that there needs to be a reference back because there is an ambiguity in the report and proposition as to the meaning of practicable in the particular context of this proposition. I invite the greffier to open the voting. Four members who have the chance of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the proposition has been rejected, 16 votes pour, 25 votes contre.
Yeah, the 16, sir.
Yes.
Those voting pour, the connotabs of Trinity, Grouville, St Mary and online St One, and then deputies Labby, Luce, Morel, Lehegara, Farnham, Wall, Miles, Renouf, Binet, Jearn, Howell and Curtis.
Going back to the debate, connotab of St Peter.
Thank you, sir. I think virtually everything has now been said, actually, but my point is really about discrimination on the residents of St Helier, where I was also at Brighter Futures this week, and the importance to some families of having a car and having somewhere to park it and being able to afford to park it was very apparent. And I think it's absolutely essential that we don't discriminate and that fairness is restored. So I can support Part A of this. Part B, I'm less certain. I would certainly like to see the disused or unused development sites in St Helier used for temporary parking. And I think that's probably a better alternative to building private car parks. I fully understand the problems that tradesmen face trying to do work in properties in St Helier and why they refuse to do so in some cases. And this isn't just tradesmen. This is a problem for health workers, for people who work for children's services, for child carers. There are some properties where they simply can't park. They try to park somewhere and the end result is that they probably get a parking fine. And I think that's something that even in the rural parishes, the attempts to reduce the number of parking spaces on developments will simply result in people parking on roads where we don't want them. I sort of fought for more parking spaces on the large developments in St Peter's with the developers, and eventually we got to a compromise. But the very first sort of sketch plans I was shown, they were suggesting 0.7 parking spaces per 3-bedroom house. And that's just not practical. And yet that is probably the standard that's set in St Helier. We can't do that. There are reasons why people need cars. We're moving to electric vehicles. So, from a sustainability point of view, yes, it's some years away, but gradually petrol and diesel cars will disappear. Nevertheless, people will buy electric vehicles. In fact, strange enough, we've encouraged them to do so with, subsidising the price. So therefore, if we're going to do that, then we need to provide the parking spaces for those people to park. So yes, certainly I'll support Part A, less decided on Part B.
Thank you, Connotab. Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. It's been very interesting listening to the debate because, as so often happens, I think, in this assembly, it's become a repository for a great many issues, as Deputy Curtis has outlined. And there is clearly deep dissatisfaction with the level of car parking provision in some developments. And I get that, and that's fine. But I hope that when members come to vote, they consider the actual impact of what the proposition says. I should say that the supplementary planning guidance that we're debating was brought in by me. I hope that that simple statement does not doom the Minister's case against this. And I hope that members will listen very carefully to the arguments that he is making and that I will also, I think, amplify to some extent. Just the origins of this, it's worth bearing in mind where this came from. I didn't invent this SPG out of thin air. I didn't make up one morning and think we need to reduce car parking provision. I'm going to produce some supplementary planning guidance. It was an instruction in the Bridging Island plan, proposal 33 to be precise. Instructed the Minister to bring forward a new policy developing sustainable transport zones, which is what the policy does, and to ensure that whatever was brought forward was consistent with the sustainable transport policy. It was also part of a package when I brought it in. I brought it in with minimum space standards for properties. And in fact, there was a deliberate trade-off in that, in the sense that I increased the minimum space standards in that planning guidance. They were also out of date. So new developments would have more space in them. And that, of course, increases the cost of development. At the same time, reducing car parking provision, not eliminating, reducing car parking provision, reduces the cost of development. The two were designed to interact. And that is not a bad thing. There's been talk made about, by the Constable about the profits of developers, but as Deputy Morell said, this is about viability. This is about viability. What can actually be built? We are asking the development industry to make developments that will deliver affordable housing. Number one priority. Number one priority. And we have to have that in our minds. So there is no free lunch when it comes to car parking provision. That is why there was a trade-off in the supplementary planning guidance. There was a balance. We reduced the amount of car parking provision in some areas and increased the size of flats and houses. If you increase the number of car parking spaces that are required in a development, you will either be increasing the cost of homes or reducing the number supplied. It's very simple. The supplementary planning guidance, actually, I hope members have read it, is actually about creating flexibility and choice. It removed rigidities in the planning system and created a situation where we could have planning applications approved that were responsive to the particular nature of the place where they were being proposed. If you were proposing a development in the centre of town in a pedestrianised area, it allowed it to be a car-free zone. Sorry, a car-free development, because it was in a car-free zone. The Constable's proposition reduces choice and reduces flexibility. Undeniably reduces flexibility. That's the entire intent of the policy. It is to introduce a one-size-fits-all. Every dwelling must have a car parking space. So, I'll come to the wherever practicable. Thank you for the heckle. The other point is that these policies, as I say, did not spring from thin air. They are consistent. The supplementary planning guidance is consistent with a long direction of travel. It's consistent with the sustainable transport policy. It's consistent with the carbon neutral map. It's consistent with the Bridging Island plan. All of which have sought to reduce dependence on the car. Reduce dependence, not eliminate the car, but to reduce development, reduce dependence. It is a nudge. There is a strong nudge. We are trying to nudge people away from dependence on the car. And that is not to say that there should be no cars. Of course, families need to use cars in many circumstances. Of course they do. This policy change actually wouldn't change that. It wouldn't St Helier or anywhere else. It wouldn't affect the ability of people to use cars. The strongest bite of this policy is in Sustainable Transport Zone 1, where it allows some developments in specific narrow circumstances to be car-free. That is a sensible response to the particular place. So we have agreed through the Sustainable Transport Policy, through the Bridging Island Plan and through the Carbon Neutral Map to try and reduce car usage and to reduce dependence on private vehicles. And we further agreed that we should focus our efforts on reducing dependence on cars in areas where alternative transport options are available. It does not mean your policy seeks to get rid of provision for cars, even in the centre of town. It does not mean that parking won't be provided. It simply says that in certain clearly defined circumstances with clear conditions that have to be met, there is an opportunity to build car-free dwellings in one small area. It creates an option that the planning system did not previously allow. This proposition would close that option down again. Many houses still need a car. Yes, they do, even in town. But not all. Not all. This policy says every new development, the default position is every new development must have a car parking unit. Every unit. The only get out is if practical. Practicable. I alluded in the speech on the reference back to the difficulties with if practicable. And it speaks to a much wider point, which is tensions in planning policy. How many times have we heard members say the problem with the planning, with the island plan is it is contradictory. There are many different things that are policies that are in tension. And to some extent, policy tension is built in. But this is not a policy tension. This is a policy contradiction. The island plan makes clear that we should be reducing car dependence and car usage. The supplementary planning guidance that the Minister will be instructed to bring forward does the opposite. What are applicants to make of this? What are objectors to make of this? It means that when applications come before the planning committee, one side will be able to stand up and say, here's a long series of quotes from the island plan saying we should reduce car usage. Another side will be able to stand up and say, but we've got supplementary planning guidance that increases it. That is a recipe for, that is a contradiction and a recipe for chaos. It doesn't seek to bring clarity to the planning process. It doesn't help us approve new developments. It is much more likely to lead, as the Minister has said, to developments not coming forward at all. There's just too much ambiguity. What bit of policy are developers supposed to listen to? There's this argument that that simply providing car spaces won't increase journeys. Well, let's examine that contention for a moment. We're going to encourage developers at vast cost to build car parking spaces. Owners are going to pay for them. Is the purpose of this policy to encourage a whole load of car parking spaces that owners of property or renters will be able to sit and look at, admiring their empty car parking space? Or perhaps admiring a car that they've bought to put in the car parking space but not use it? Of course there is a link between car ownership and car usage. It's explicit in every speech that has been made. The aim is for people to be able to use them. We're not trying to stop people using cars. We're simply saying that the nudge should be fewer cars. And the nudge should be greatest in areas where sustainable transport is most available. I want to tackle this notion of discrimination. It is not discrimination to have different policies apply in different parts of the island. It is the very essence of planning policy. I am lucky enough to live in the green zone. I cannot build certain things in that green zone. My neighbour, who is in the built-up area, can. That is not discrimination. It is planning policy in action. The whole basis of planning policy is to provide different policies that are specific to the different areas. That's not discrimination. Sorry, sir, I've messed around with my speech on my iPad, and that's always a recipe for disaster. I do want to tackle, I have to say I'm disappointed with the Infrastructure Minister's comments. The sustainable transport policy has been airily cast aside, and the argument, extraordinary argument, that more parking will lead to less journeys because fewer people will be moving their cars first thing in the morning. I'd love to hear officer advice on whether usage in the morning to move cars would compensate for the wider use of cars that will be encouraged by this policy. And I remind the Minister and indeed the Assembly that private car use is at the bottom of the pyramid of sustainable transport. The bottom of the pyramid. Everything else is a priority before that. So I get that there is a mood music here that says that that planning policy has been too restrictive on car parking. So in conclusion, I'd say you can be against the current supplementary planning guidance and still vote against this proposition for the simple reason that in voting for this proposition, you are not voting just against the existing supplementary planning guidance, you are voting for new supplementary planning guidance. So the job is not just to judge whether or not the current supplementary planning guidance is right or wrong. It is to answer the question, will the new supplementary planning guidance be an improvement? No, sir, it will not. It will put huge contradictions into the planning making process. It will mean we over-provide for cars for years to come. Look at all those developments where we already know that there are unused car parking spaces, and yet we are saying that we will provide more car parking spaces, even for people who do not need them. I lived until I was in my 40s without owning a car. Not everyone needs a car at every stage of their life. The planning system should have the flexibility to provide that. It will increase the cost of housing, and in particular of affordable housing, because the constable may not believe that putting car parking spaces in, but unfortunately the evidence says it will increase the cost of housing. It will also deter development that might otherwise have taken place, and it will undermine a development industry that is already struggling, and it will make it harder to improve air quality. I urge members to vote against. I think the issues are too important to ignore the actual detail. The vote is not a free hit to say more parking should be provided. It is a concrete proposal to ask the Minister to bring forward a new supplementary planning guidance. If he does that, he will create blatant contradictions in the policy framework for decision making. If he doesn't do what the proposition says, he will be blatantly defying the Assembly. There is a potential for reform of this SPG, but it would be a much finer tuned policy concentrating on particular aspects of the SPG. This is not that, and I ask members to reject it.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir, and I'm very pleased to follow Deputy Reniff's very well-considered and thought-through speech. I would like to be sympathetic to this proposition, and I am sympathetic to it, because I've worked out this morning, over the course of my life, I've lived in 7 flats, and in only one of them, which was a relatively new build in St Helier, was there dedicated parking for 1 car. It was a small block of 4 flats. So I absolutely understand the frustration of driving round in the evening, trying to find a place to stop, to unpack your car with your shopping. And I didn't have children to worry about then, so it was just myself. But I know how frustrating it is driving round, trying to find a parking space close to your own home. The first thing I would say, sir, however, is that I only got my first car when I was in the 4th of those flats, which was the first flat that I actually owned, or the bank owned, as the case may be, because I couldn't afford it. I could not have hoped to afford a car and buy a flat at that time. And it was some years before I did buy a car, because that's what people do. They buy well, perhaps in the old days, you started off in outside Jersey, you start off perhaps in a flat share, and then you get your own place, which you rent, and then you maybe manage to buy a place with 1 bedroom, and then you might manage to buy a place with 2 bedrooms, and that's how people do it in other parts of the UK. And my big concern with this is we talk time and time and time and time again about how we want people to be able to buy their own homes. We want affordable homes, and this will do nothing to create affordability. It will make, particularly for first-time buyers, and possibly also for people who are buying retirement flats, retirement homes, who may not be able to drive. We'll be creating a cost that people will not be able to afford. It will be adding to the building cost, and therefore will add to the sale cost. Andean, for example, in their Maison des Arches development, have first-time buyer flats. And there, you can buy the flat alone, without a parking space, or you can opt to buy a parking space separately at a cost of £40,000. Now, if you're adding a parking space to every first-time buyer flat, or every retirement flat, and you put up the price by, let's say, 40,000, it will no doubt be 50,000 or 60,000. That will be putting those homes out of reach of first-time buyers. We've already been told that construction industry is on its knees. We've had construction companies going out of business at a rate. We've been told that the buy-to-let market has gone through the floor. That's one of the reasons for that. We've been told, although we haven't heard about it for some time, that there is a block of flats sitting unsold because landlords aren't buying and other people can't afford it. Every time, this will have a huge impact on the construction industry if they have got to build parking spaces. I absolutely agree, anybody who's building homes with 2 or 3 bedrooms, which are clearly family homes, should be including at least 1 parking space. It's absurd to think otherwise, in my mind. But we have to remember that every time we make an intervention in terms of how builders have to build, we add a cost. We are meant to be reducing red tape and bureaucracy. This is adding, in a way, its own red tape and bureaucracy. It's adding more hurdles in the planning process. It's adding more work for everybody, and it will add to the cost. Our interventions have a real-world impact on builders and the people who are trying to buy what they are building. And we must bear that in mind. We must bear that in mind. And my simple point on where practicable is, yes, it's a simple word. Is it practicable to do something? I had the benefit of visiting the homes that Andean were building at Zion and in St Peter's, and I saw around them, and yes, they look like lovely homes. And they have spent, I would say particularly in St Peter's, and I have to confess I did not ask how many parking spaces each home is allocated, but the developers, certainly St Peter, were very proud of how they have designed that development, where cars are not, every house does not have a parking space near it, but they have a very large piece in the middle. They have tried to create a real village environment and have a space in the middle for the environment, for greenery, for leisure, for play. Now, practicality. Is it practical to build a car parking space? Yes, but at what cost? We build developments which have got loads of parking, but they have no green space and they have no play facilities. We talk time and time again about play facilities. We spent a long time yesterday talking about green space. And by building parking, is it practicable to build parking? Yes, it is. Is it practical to also have green space and play facilities? Probably not. So what will we lose? We will lose the green space and the play facilities, as well as increasing the cost. We cannot have it all. We cannot have it all. Every house purchase, everybody, and I often say to people when they come to Jersey, you may have your dream house. We all have an idea of what our dream house looks like. I'm sure we all do. But when you come to Jersey, you have to compromise something. You maybe have to compromise your view. You would love a sea view, and perhaps if you lived someplace in the UK, you could afford a sea view, but you can't have it in Jersey. You may want a huge garden, but you can't afford it because you want 3 bedrooms and a garden. So everybody has to make compromises in Jersey with what they buy. And that includes people at the very, very high end, because those people also have very clear demands about what they are wanting. Everybody has to compromise. And this will lead, I suspect, to more compromises around green space and play facilities. We have to be realistic. We have to realise about what developers can afford to build and what people can afford to buy, and crucially, what government can support, because we cannot now support everybody with an extra £50,000 to buy a place with a parking space, because we don't have that money either, frankly. So we have to be realistic, and much as I agree that parking has to be available when it's practical, I don't think I can support this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone wish to speak on this proposition? Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. So I do cautiously rise because while I share the environmental ambitions of many members, my overriding concern is that of the confidence of the market. And for months we have been living with a housing market that is not overheating but cooling rapidly. Developers are delaying schemes, builders are scaling back, and buyers are still standing. And every signal that this Assembly sends, however well-intentioned, is read by the industry, is what I thought the Environment Minister was trying to warn us of, and I heard him, is read as either a further green light or a red light, and for too long we've been effectively living in, and we are living in, a situation of a flashing amber light. There is uncertainty, sir, baked into this government. And it did not it did not start with this proposition. At the heart of the Constable's proposition is a policy that emanated out of the Bridging Island Plan. And that Bridging Island Plan, I hate to remind members, but I know that it will be with the support of the Constable of St Helier, it failed to basically deliver enough homes to meet the demographic pressures. And that's why we are seeing, I think, the intensity, and have seen the intensity of development in his parish, and then the parking issue, because families are forced not to be able to live in homes, which everybody wants to do, and the extent to which we can do it is obviously an issue, but it is a matter of public policy, and it's this Assembly's policies. Effectively, we are in a pretty dreadful situation. Nobody would have imagined that the Bridging Island Plan, I said yesterday, sir, that it was supposed to be a Bridging Island Plan until 2025, and there's no prospect. I know but at the same time, I also know that the Environment Minister's working as hard as he can, and he's doing what he can, and I commend him for the efforts that he's doing. It's, of course, contradictory planning guidance. In one paragraph saying developers there's no minimum standing for parking, and then next insisting that they must consider parking provision. The Constable of St Helier, and actually, sir, the rather confusing thing for my constituents and myself is he's also the Assistant Infrastructure Minister. And so, forgive me, sir, if I don't quite understand which way government is working at the moment, because he is actually the Infrastructure Assistant Minister, and I don't criticise him for that, I just make that observation. And I actually commend him in whatever capacity he's doing it, I think it's the Constable of St Helier, for attempting to fill a vacuum. And I was surprised to hear some of the hectoring voices, certainly I heard from behind me, that the car is not important, because I think the Constable's quite right. The car is important, and that may be an electric car, and it may be a driverless car in future, and we need future-proof policies for that, and I'm not at all convinced that we have. I might suggest that we need supplementary guidance on lots of things. Electric car policy. Are we up to date on that? I don't know. Electric cars are different from diesel cars, and more people are going to buy them as they come down in cost. I hope not with a government subsidy. Ministers are claiming that requiring a parking space will push up costs, and I would suggest that prices, they're right, but I'd suggest that prices have already risen for more serious reasons than a strip of car park and a car park above ground or below ground that costs £50,000 or £90,000. They've risen, sir, because of, unfortunately, policy uncertainty and policy failure. And dare I say it, it's not only planning. If members really want to do affordability, which is what some people are saying, and members are, and I just simply am confused by this debate, because we're talking about affordability, yet I'm looking forward to the budget debate, sir, and a stamp duty surcharge that's frozen private rentals. Renters have not really been mentioned much in this proposition, and I think the Constable, in his summing up, may well voice the concern of renters who are able to rent a car parking space with their property, because they can't, because there isn't one there as part of their unit of accommodation because of the underlying issue that's there. I've met a number of people who are living in St Helier who are basically spending hours of their time trying to find a car parking space, which they can't do because there's no car park provision in their rented accommodation. And of course, I don't need to go on about the problems with the rental market. The rental market is now also in limbo because you wouldn't be a developer building rental accommodation with a surcharge in place. And I'm sorry if that riles some members, but it is true. The economics are absolutely clear. And if members want to do something in relation to affordability of homes and deal with the fact that a car parking space is going to be required, then one of the policy instruments to do would be to abolish stamp duty and get the housing market moving so that people can upsize or downsize to the right sort of accommodation. At the moment, it's basically nothing, and it's basically in aspic, and the government is not working. And of course, it's not only St Helier that really is in this situation. Urban pressures are equally existing in the greater St Helier, as one planner once described in error, the areas of the town in St Saviour, in Georgetown and all those other areas. But of course, St Clement and the representatives of St Bullards are quite right in their observations. They are basically increasingly urban and there are challenges in density and demand. Families across the urban areas face that daily calculation about where to park, how to reach to work, how to balance caring needs with modern life. One of the most important things was said by an earlier speaker, in my view, is the fact that where people are in a home and require a home help or a carer, the carer can't find a car parking space. I mean, it's a real issue, and therefore the Constable is right. The phrase "where practical" gives the necessary discretion, if I may say. It does not oblige planners to carve out car parking space into impossible plots. It simply provides a reasonable baseline, a measure of fairness and foresight. And I think that's what Deputy Balash said. The Constable's proposition, therefore, has the real possibility, knowing that he's a member of government, as an assistant minister, I think, in actually getting some predictability into a policy where there is clearly a wrong and there is policy confusion. I will not want to see the island paved over. I want to have a realistic opportunity for people to get into home ownership and in the rental market, and to have the ability of having a car if they want one. And I think that the majority of families and individuals do want, if they can afford it, a car. This Assembly has the opportunity, in supporting the Constable and being very mindful of the challenges that the Environment Minister said, well, the solution is to get on with the supplementary guidance as quickly as possible and not make it retrospective, and get on with it, because it's the uncertainty that's killing the market and killing expectation. And we have the opportunity I will be supporting the Constable, but the offsets can also be to give the developers confidence in the upcoming budget, where we have some opportunities to advance policies. I hope we can rebuild confidence, because confidence, nobody said anything about this in this debate, sir. Confidence is, in the period of time I've been involved in politics, I cannot remember a period where confidence is so low in virtually every aspect of the housing market. Prices have fallen in real terms, and yet first-time buyers aren't buying. There is a problem, and nobody seems to be talking about the elephant in the room. The housing market is in crisis, but it's not the crisis that the housing minister spoke about. It's a crisis of being in a no man's land, no person's land, rather. I don't believe that car parking will cure the housing crisis, but clarity may help. Clarity, consistency, and credibility, they're the real blocks of affordability. The government can and will, I'm sure, deliver a rejuvenated confidence and a faith in policy with this decision. Victor Hugo wasn't in St Saviour, sir, but he was across the way in St Clement. But we do have the Rocher de Poscri, the Rock of the Exiles, and I think he said, the future has several names. For the weak, it is impossible. For the faint-hearted, it is unknown. And for the courageous, it is an opportunity. So let us show a little courage. Let's bring some coherence, some fairness, and some practicable opportunity into the housing market. We can discover a sense of balance to create places that are not only economically viable, but also human, beautiful, and enduring. And the island needs us to get a housing market working with the right planning policies. And it is for the reasons of balance and humanity that I will gladly support the Constable of St Helier in his proposition, and encourage the active and very, as he described it, the purposeful Environment Minister, with his, hopefully the colleague, with the Constable's boss, the Infrastructure Minister, to sort out the parking problem, because it's real. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone wish to speak on this proposition? Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. I'll state at the outset that I will not be voting for this proposition. So it's been an interesting morning. I have, as well as sitting in the Assembly, had the pleasure of enjoying the precincts of the Assembly and talking to colleagues in the tea rooms. It was less of a pleasure to learn many of the things that I've learned, because actually it's been a very educational morning. And some of the things I've learned are, when it comes to election years, too many states members are willing to jettison their principles. And when it comes to election years, as in fact I would argue we've just heard from Deputy Joseph, members are willing to tie themselves in knots in order to justify a position that is unjustifiable. And it was sad to learn this, because I have great respect for states members, and I do find it incredibly upsetting that the mere fact of an election will see members voting for a proposition that they know will increase the cost of housing in Jersey and will lead to a reduction in the provision of housing in Jersey. And they know this, not just because I am saying it, not just because Deputy Miller is saying it, not just because others are saying it as well, but because it's a simple fact of economic life. It reminds me, sir, of the debate we had a year or two ago about the trainee wage, where it was clear, and on any basic understanding of economics, by removing the trainee wage, it was clear that young people would then start to become excluded from jobs. This Assembly refused to listen to that. Members who should have known better, because their employers, etc., voted for that because they felt it was the well-intentioned thing to do. The result was young people started not to be offered jobs, because why would you ask somebody into your firm who has zero experience when you're paying the same amount to someone who's got some experience? and it was a simple fact of life, and this is very similar. Sir, it is a stated aim of the Common Strategic Policy. It is our priority, as the Council of Ministers states in its Common Strategic Policy, to provide more affordable homes for islanders. This proposition will do the exact opposite. So any member and any minister voting for this proposition is voting against the Common Strategic Policy. And if they want somebody other than myself to explain to them why they are now voting to support more expensive homes and fewer homes in Jersey, then perhaps they would prefer to listen to the President of the Jersey Construction Council rather than myself. He has very kindly given his view on this proposition. Yes, this will stop many projects as they will become unaffordable. It's very simple. This proposition will stop many projects because they will become unaffordable. That goes against the Common Strategic Policy. That goes against the Housing Minister's own aims, he states, to create more affordable housing for islanders. I understand, because I believe the Reform Jersey are going to vote with the Constable on this proposition, I understand that to mean that the Housing Minister is quite simply voting for more expensive accommodation in Jersey and more expensive homes in Jersey. It's also, I think, very interesting, and if I cast my mind back to my first term as a States member, one of the, and I say this cheekily, yes, but purely to identify something, one of my favourite little phrases that came out of one debate was Senator Gorst, as he was at the time, coining the term reformonomics. And it seemed to capture a lot at the time. And I believe this is a fantastic example of reformonomics in action. But another thing I have learned this morning, sir, is that Advanced Jersey subscribe to reformonomics. And they are indeed subscribing to more expensive housing in Jersey and fewer homes being built in Jersey by supporting the Constable's proposition. So we now have clear joining of left and right together across the economic table. The question in my mind, sir, is this due to economic naivety, or is this due to effectively willful ignorance because they feel there's an election in sight and they prefer to try to pander to an electorate whilst discarding their claims to leadership? Because as we all know, leaders do not do necessarily what is seen as the populist thing to do. And so, sir, I do ask, and I'll go back to the President of the Jersey Construction Council, this will stop many projects as they will become unaffordable. This is, and he continues, it's very frustrating if this proposition is passed. Some more developments will not happen, or the accommodation will not be affordable. It is that simple. Those are not my words. Those are the words of the Construction Council, the President of the Construction Council. And members, if they choose to vote for the Constable's proposition, need to do so with those words ringing in their ears. Because this is a proposition that will make housing more expensive in Jersey. It is a simple fact of life. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. It's good to see that the phrase willful ignorance is acceptable in this assembly. I didn't think it would be, but there we go. But
if I may just apologise if that was seen, I didn't mean to insult anybody, I apologise.
That's right, so I'm sure we can get on. It's interesting, I was going to claim the phrase Morellanomics, but it's very difficult to say. The world, according to Deputy Morell, was always an interesting one, particularly when you're in reform, but we can carry on that. I love the notion of left and right joining across a table. It'd be, I don't know, it'd probably be a lovely oak table, I'd imagine. Perhaps I don't know, perhaps an IKEA table, but that's imported, we won't do that. There's some very interesting points here, and I do speak as a representative of St Helier, and sometimes I do think there's a St Helier phobia that ensues, where whatever happens in St Helier is seen as either not important or not valued, During some debates, we've had the idea that even representation here isn't valued, and the votes of the St Helier residents aren't valued, and that's a real shame because I find that very insulting for the voters of St Helier, and I certainly don't prescribe to that. And it's very interesting that we talk about. Let's go on to some more positive things. This notion that I agree that not using cars is a great idea. I'm the one who years ago brought the proposition to have a free bus service, which I still firmly stand here and say that's what we're regretting in this assembly on to today, that we have not imposed that free bus service, given the ability for people. Because we don't want to spend money on those types of things. Oh no, we don't want to do that and make it transport genuinely accessible. But let's not go on about that, sir, because that's my obsession with buses. As I remember the former senator, or whatever he was, Deputy Lafondra, said to me, I thought it was a sweet thing to say, sir, because it's a nice thing to be obsessed with. But it's great to be cycling about and using bikes and walking. I would ask the Deputy of St Brillard's, when he cycles in, where does he put his car? Probably parked outside his house because he's got a parking space. Now, for St Helier residents, that may not be the case. And so you have a choice, don't have a car, don't have access to a car. For those many St Helier residents who work, for those too many St Helier residents who have to work 2 or 3 or 4 jobs just to make ends meet, who have to start very early in the morning and travel across the island to start their first job, that car, that very inexpensive car, is a very important thing for them to have to get to the jobs in order they can earn perhaps minimum wage in order to carry on with paying their very high rents. And that's one of the issues that we have to face here. And this is a real challenge for us. Because yes, in an ideal world, we would have car-free zones, we'd have car-free environments, and I would support that, absolutely. To give people accessibility to get around, though, was voted against in this assembly because we can't afford to subsidise buses. We don't want to do that. But we don't want St Helier residents to have cars or be able anywhere to park them. What we do need in St Helier is a much more joined-up approach. So, for example, and I think the reason I'm happy to support Part A, I've got a question over Part B, is that the where practicable makes sense. I think that's enough for me. If it is genuinely not practicable because the development won't go ahead, then it's not practicable. It seems common sense to me. So I think some of the fear-mongering needs to be not worried about. But I think we need to discuss what happens in St Helier in a much wider view. Many of the parking spaces in St Helier may well be taken up by cars that aren't from St Helier, but they're convenient for people. It may be one-person businesses. I get that. It's convenient to park them in town, pay for Saturday, stay all day Sunday and take up that parking space. Perhaps that's some of the issues we need to be looking at for St Helier as a whole, across St Helier, so that we can have them parking in other. And if we work together as parishes, there may be other parishes who can find spaces for those cars to be in, and then we create those parking spaces for people in St Helier. Perhaps the parking space we've already got made could have residential priority on some of the floors, so that we can create parking spaces for new developments without that extra cost. There needs to be some creativity here. But if we start from a principle that it simply doesn't have to happen, it will never happen. And we've seen that many a times, that things simply don't happen if we don't make them happen. My problem with Part B is I do not want to see lots of private car parks created across Jersey. I think we lose control of costs, we lose control of charges, we lose control of what they're there for, we lose control of fines, we end up with a situation that we have in the UK, which is absolutely insane, about fines and costs and not knowing who's fined you, what you're paying. We'll end up with wheel clamping. I really think we need to be cautious with that, so I'm not so sure about Part B. I think we have a contradiction here for St Helier. And the contradiction we have for St Helier is that we will refuse certain developments in some areas of St Helier over parking with the Bridge and Island plan, which is not my speciality. Well, some areas are because I changed it. We will change certain areas of St Helier over parking when it suits us, for reasons that I don't think can be justified in the way that they are. And I think that with this, I mean, it's difficult, this part A of the proposition, because I know how challenging it will be, but I think the where practical bit will fix that. We also have to have the Minister come back. And I do actually agree with Deputy Alex Curtis, I think it was him who said, that my concern is, and I think that may well happen, it will come back with something that is not a massive change because of the practicality bit. However, that will strengthen the Bridging Island plan because we've voted to say where's practicable, is the evidence that it's not practicable, so let's get on with it. So I don't see a problem there if that comes back not particularly changed. So yes, there is an issue for St Helier residents. There is an issue. And I'm afraid, you know, reform gets mentioned a lot. I sometimes think we have to be better than good in order to even be heard. And with criticism, whereas individual members can just say, oh, we'll do that and we'll change our mind, and that's fine. There's been a lot of change of mind in this assembly at times. But we have been consistent with this, but just to represent the residents in St Helier. Their votes are valid. Our representation here and our position here is valid, and it will continue to be. And we look ahead to the next election with optimism that that validity might grow. Absolutely. So I'm happy to support Part A. I would ask the Constable to be really clear about what he means by practicable and explain that again, because I think it will really help the situation. I think if he's clear as to what that word means, it might convince some other members of the Assembly. But I would also I try and convince me about Part B, because I do worry about the development of private car parks across St Helier, because I don't think they're a good thing on such a small island. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy.
Propose the adjournment.
Members content to adjourn? So adjourned until 2:15.